The stories about Black Hollow Park were the kind of thing kids told around campfires. They spoke of shadows that moved without a source, of voices calling people deeper into the woods, and of the unlucky few who never came out. For years, the rumors had painted the park as a cursed place, a forbidden zone that no one visited willingly. But 16-year-old Tyler never believed in any of it. He was the kind of teenager who scoffed at ghost stories and dismissed urban legends as overblown nonsense. When his friends dared him to spend a night in the park, he laughed it off as an easy challenge. "It's just a bunch of trees," he said, shrugging. "What's the worst that could happen?" Armed with nothing but a flashlight and his phone, Tyler set out at sunset, determined to prove that Black Hollow Park was nothing more than an ordinary patch of forest. But as the last rays of daylight faded and the dense trees swallowed him whole, he started to understand why people were afraid of this place. The deeper Tyler ventured into the park, the quieter it became. At first, it was just the usual sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets. But soon, even those faded, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The trail twisted and turned, its path barely visible in the growing darkness. The trees loomed overhead, their bare branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Tyler turned on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. He checked his phone for the time, 7:48 p.m. He'd only been in the park for an hour, but it already felt like he'd been walking for much longer. Just a few more hours, he thought, reassuring himself. He reached a clearing and decided to take a break. Sitting on a fallen log, Tyler scrolled through his phone, hoping to distract himself from the oppressive silence. But the lack of signal only added to his growing unease. That's when he heard it, a voice faint and distant, calling his name. "Tyler!" He froze, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The sound came from deep within the woods, far off the trail. "Tyler!" It was louder this time, more insistent. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. No response. Tyler stood, his flashlight trembling in his hand. He told himself it was probably just one of his friends trying to scare him. But the voice, it wasn't theirs. It sounded familiar, but not quite right. "Tyler, come here." Against his better judgment, Tyler stepped off the trail, moving toward the sound. The underbrush grew thicker, clawing at his legs as he pushed forward. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled trunks twisting into unnatural shapes. "Tyler!" The voice was closer now, almost urgent. "Where are you?" he called, scanning the woods with his flashlight. The beam landed on something ahead, a figure, barely visible through the trees. It was a woman, her back to him, standing perfectly still. "Hello?" Tyler called, his voice shaking. She didn't move. Tyler hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But his feet carried him forward, drawn by a pull he couldn't explain. The woman turned slowly, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette on tangled strings. Her face was obscured by the shadows, but her voice was clear. "Tyler, you shouldn't have come here." His blood ran cold. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, taking a step back. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a hand and pointed deeper into the woods. "Go back," she whispered, "before it's too late." Panic clawed at Tyler's chest as he stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. When he looked up, the woman was gone. The woods were silent again, but the air felt heavier, pressing down on him like a weight. Tyler scrambled to his feet and ran, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he crashed through the underbrush. He didn't care which direction he was going. He just wanted to get out. But no matter how far he ran, the trees never seemed to thin. He stopped to catch his breath, leaning against a tree and trying to calm his racing heart. Then he heard it again. "Tyler!" The voice was right behind him. He spun around, his flashlight sweeping across the trees, but there was no one there. "Tyler!" It came from above this time. He looked up, and his heart nearly stopped. Hanging from the branches was a figure, twisted, contorted, and unmistakably dead. Its face was frozen in a silent scream, its eyes wide and unseeing. And it was wearing his clothes. Tyler's scream echoed through the forest as he turned and ran, his mind reeling. Was it a hallucination? A warning? The trees seemed to shift around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. the trail was gone, replaced by an endless maze of shadows and tangled roots. His flashlight flickered, the beam growing weaker with each step. "Tyler!" The voice was everywhere now, circling him, closing in. "You shouldn't have come." The next morning, a hiker found Tyler's backpack and phone at the edge of the park. The phone screen was cracked, the last photo taken showing nothing but a blur of trees and shadows. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Tyler was ever found. Locals whispered about Black Hollow Park, adding his name to the growing list of people who had vanished there. And on quiet nights, those brave enough to venture near the woods claimed they could still hear his voice, faint and desperate, calling for help. The end. Let me know your thoughts.